right, so today we have a very, very special guest, my friend and yours, the man known as the Sound Effects Wrangler and the founder of the Hollywood Sound Museum, which, by the way, I'm actually wearing the Hollywood Sound Museum
from last year.
Yes?
Yeah.
He actually made me pay for it, though. But let's welcome our friend and yours, Mr. Steve Lee.
Yay!
How are you?
We are very well. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. It's a little early here. You guys on the East Coast, you're getting me out of my bed at an early hour.
Well,
but I don't.
But in all fairness, in LA, any time before noon is considered super early.
Especially for musicians, yes.
This is true.
Yeah, right.
So can I see both of your hands for a second there? Let's see both of your hands. Oh my goodness! So you're either doing a Michael Jackson impression, or you're going to handle something very delicate.
As you said, I'm founding the Hollywood Sound Museum, and a museum is full of artifacts, and artifacts require the white glove, which I have quite a few of. And
according to Indiana Jones, artifacts belong in a museum. So you are kind of like the Indiana Jones of sound. So what are you going to use those gloves for, or that glove for?
No,
today?
I've got a couple of my friends right here. There's this guy.
Oh my goodness.
This is Bill Varney's Oscar that he won for sound mixing for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Speaking of Indiana Jones.
The devil. Nice.
Yeah, exactly. So it's appropriate. And I have his brother here. This is Bill Varney's Oscar for mixing another little film called The Empire Strikes Back.
Wow.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Arguably the best film in the series.
I think I saw it once or twice myself. But yeah, these are in our collection for the Hollywood Sound Museum, courtesy of Lisa Varney, Bill's daughter. We just celebrated what would have been Bill's 68th birthday just the other day. So yeah, he was a dear friend of mine. He was a brilliant mixer, worked on so many films. Check out his IMDb. It just goes on and on and on. But yeah, we're fortunate to have these two pieces, and these are like two of my favorite pieces in the museum, obviously.
I can imagine. Now, you and I got in a little trouble over the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just remembered that too. We got in a little trouble over the Raiders of the Lost Ark Oscar.
Yeah, I remember
because so anytime I go to LA,
he tried to trade a T-shirt.
That's right. Anytime I go to LA, Steve and I end up at a Mel's Diner somewhere. And it's not always the same one, but we go out and we have breakfast. Right. And we met up in the parking lot, and he was letting me hold the Oscar, which, by the way, they're super heavy.
Just gotten it. Yeah, I might have just had it in my car. So hey, you want to see?
So he goes. I just happen to have an Oscar in my car.
He goes in. He opens up the back seat. It's like underneath a McDonald's bag. He goes, let me get this out of the way.
Well, I won't reveal what I usually carry it in, but I try to keep it a nondescript kind of thing, so people don't know what I'm carrying, because I'm moving these for like installations, and we've had a bunch of fundraisers where I've let people have their picture taken with it and all that. So I try to keep it on the down low whenever I'm traveling with one.
Sure.
Well, I think the fact that you're wearing a glove when handling it says that you're going to take it with care. But we were out, so I brought a Chop Shop T-shirt for Steve, and so I was giving him the shirt, and so as a joke, we posted
the picture. I'm sure it'll pop up right now.
Yeah, we had a picture of he and I where he's holding the Chop Shop shirt and I'm holding the Oscar, and so I posted it and I said, hey, I just traded Steve a shirt,
and people
Chop
lost
Shop
their
minds.
There
were individuals that thought we were being serious.
I think I got a text from Lisa Varney saying,
Yeah, that's not a fair trade. I would have to at least throw in a Chop Shop hat or something to like make it.
Sure.
I would thought it would
a couple sound effects or something. Yeah.
I thought maybe one Oscar wouldn't be a fair trade. You need like an Oscar and maybe a Golden Globe.
There you go.
Yeah,
yes,
for a T-shirt.
For the shirt, because you can't buy them anyway.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
They're collector's items.
I don't sell them mainly because people are buying them.
Right.
I like to think it's because they're priceless.
That's right.
So you are the sound effects wrangler.
Well, that's a title that was given to me by, I believe, one of the directors we worked with, because I started as a sound librarian for many years at Weddington Productions, a now defunct Post Place, but they were, very big in the 80s and 90s. We did a ton of movies, but I was working in the library, but sort of working my way up as a sound designer. But I also got this sort of reputation for acquiring specific classic sounds that were needed for a show. Like when we were working for Joe Dante, who is a huge film buff and, directed Gremlins and all these amazing films. He put in a lot of references to old movies that he loved. And there were a lot of like old monsters and robots from all these old classic 50s and 60s movies. So he would, of course, want them to sound like the original. So I took it upon myself. As the librarian, it was part of my job, but I sort of had this affinity for going and finding the original tracks for these things. And there was one show where there was one reel. It was Looney Tunes Back in Action. And there's a sequence where there's like this parade of all these old movie monsters. And I made sure that they all sounded exactly like the originals. And I remember we were talking about a credit because I'd cut sound on it too. But I'd done a lot of this, archaeological sound work. And Mark Mangini and I were talking about what do you want to be credited as? You want to be an editor or a librarian? I said, well, I did a little more than librarian, but, a little more than editing. And then Joe Dante, in his infinite wisdom, comes over and says, why don't we call you Sound Effects Wrangler? And it just stuck. And I've had that credit for like 3 or 4 films.
Now, is Joe aware that you're using that voice when you impersonate him?
Yeah. Joe.
I'm Joe Dante.
I'm Joe Dante. Now, if you hear him, I love Joe dearly. I've known him all my life. He was a dear friend of my father's. So I've known him forever. And he actually helped introduce me to Mark Mangini, which was very nice of him.
So you're
everybody does that voice.
So you're the original, the OG then when it comes to Sound Effects Wrangler.
I don't think anyone has used that term before, so I would have to say that that's probably the case. Yes.
There you go. Well, you know what? What more perfect person to found the Hollywood Sound Museum than the Sound Effects Wrangler?
It's very kind. You're not the first to say that, and I do appreciate that. I don't know. You were talking about Raiders, and some people have compared me to Indiana Jones as being this sort of sound archaeologist that like finds all these things. I kind of equate myself to being the Forrest Gump of film sound because I've been so lucky to sort of stumble through all these wonderful tracks, all these films. I haven't necessarily had a huge part in them, but I was there and got to see some of the stuff go down. So yeah, that Forrest Gump of sound works too, I think.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. I got to know, what was it like to star?
Oh, this is huge. We're getting away from sound
here. This goes to your acting career now.
We did some digging.
Oh, absolutely. I have to ask about your role.
This predates my sound years.
In the Kentucky Fried Movie.
Yeah.
What was it like to be on that?
First of all, how did that happen?
Yeah.
How did that happen? My family was good friends with John Landis when he was up and coming. When he had just directed his first film called Schlock, where he played this sort of ape creature designed by a very young Rick Baker.
Yes.
And they were on their way up. And my mom, even when she met John, she said he has success written all over his face. Dad got a call from John saying, hey, I'm doing this movie with this comedy troupe, the Zucker Brothers, and we're filming 3 scenes from it for a proof of concept. They wanted to sell the feature. And so they got financing to do 3 segments. And one of them was a silly segment called, it was a takeoff on those like high school science films where they talk about different products and things like that. And this film was about zinc oxide. And it had this moment where this woman is in a 50s kitchen, just a household kitchen, just a housewife, and she turns to the camera and, well, how do I use zinc oxide? And the narrator comes on, well, if it wasn't for zinc oxide, you wouldn't have that bar of soap, and it disappears. You wouldn't have your dish towels, and they disappear. And things just start continually disappearing. And at one point you hear, the safety catch in your son's rifle contains. You hear a shot off stage. And then I fall onto the set bleeding my guts out. That was my big cinematic on-camera break.
So I watched that movie looking for you, and I didn't realize that you were a kid. So I'm like, where's Steve? Where's Steve? And finally, I had to look at the credits. I'm like, oh my God, he was the kid.
Yeah.
It was 1977. I was 12. And, John was a dear friend of my family, and he just called my dad and asked if I'd want to do it. And of course I want to do it. Shot it on a weekend over at the old Culver Studios in Culver City, near old MGM, and I had a blast. We shot out over a day, and it was really great. It was fun, and I had done a little more on camera stuff after that. But I kind of, when you're a kid and you go to your 12th cattle call audition where there's hundreds of kids that look exactly like you, it's like you kind of have to, your heart has to be in it. And I like, this is fun, but I don't know if I can do this. But now with the sound stuff, because I've been able to do like some vocal work and things like that, I sort of get that acting bug out of me in another way. I channel it in another way. But I loved that experience and doing all that stuff back then, and that was really fun. And it comes up every now and then.
Well, may I say, you haven't aged a bit since.
Gosh,
yeah, a little, just like a tiny bit. No, seriously though, the way that you laid on that floor.
At least I'm still teenagers' voices.
Right.
I watched that movie yesterday just for reference. By the way, if you're a viewer on the show and you're under the age of 18, don't watch that movie because it's highly inappropriate for anybody under 18. But that whole movie,
I couldn't even go to screenings of it.
Oh, I can see why.
I saw my segment and a couple of other things, and my parents would always lead me out of the room whenever the other stuff happened because it's a rated R film, and it's not all of it is R rated, but they're like, it's a sketch movie. It was one of the first sketch movies, and every now and then there was a really raunchy one.
Well, yeah, but this was 1970s R.
Yeah,
1970s R was like borderline X nowadays.
Yeah, it was intense. Yeah,
but it was it was like a giant Saturday Night Live sketch, but with like massive special effects,
which had never been done before. They were really the first. The Zucker brothers this is one of the things that got them noticed. And from this, they were able to get the job to do Airplane.
Yeah. And my only claim to fame with the Kentucky Fried movie is that I got to stay in one of the Zucker brothers' house. They had sold it. My friend's parents had bought it, and I went and visited them and got to stay in their house. I was like, this is one of the Zucker brothers' house. It was out in Connecticut.
Jerry or David?
I don't remember. This was 20-something years ago. But cool. It was in Connecticut, I think.
Well, here's some more trivia that sort of it shows what a small world it is. The great Larry Blake, whom I'm sure you're familiar with, he has a cameo in Airplane. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Larry Blake is a sound historian, librarian, sound editor, mixer. He's been around forever. He was actually at Weddington before I got there. He is, there's the scene in Airplane where the one woman takes out the guitar and starts singing the folk song, and everybody leans in and smiles. A guy comes from upside down and smiles. That's Larry.
There you go. That's cool.
Yeah.
So after your huge acting career,
massive acting career,
right?
At what point did you decide to make the transition to sound?
I'd always been interested in sound. I mean, I see this sort of similar trend with people of my age when they get interested in it. Recording movies off the TV with their little cassette recorder and reel-to-reel things and splicing up tape and playing with it. And I sort of stumbled into it that way. And I listened to tons of movies. And I started to make the realization that there were certain sounds that I would hear over and over. They would get reused. And so the light bulb went off. That must be somebody's job to save these sounds and reuse them. And from that moment on, I started learning as much as I could. My dad was a writer and a consultant on films, and he'd go to the Academy Library to do research, and I would tag along and pull out like as many of the sound articles and books I could find. And back then, it wasn't that many. In the early 70s and before, there just wasn't that much out there. Then comes along this film called Star Wars. And suddenly we have this, sound designer rock star named Ben Burt, and there's all this literature about that. And so I learned everything I could, and I started corresponding with Ben, and it took off after that, pretty much.
It's funny that you mentioned Star Wars and then recording things off of the television set with a cassette recorder, because when I was in 6th grade, we had to do a science report on the moon. And so I immediately went to Star Wars, which we had on VHS, and I just kept doing the credits over and over again, and I made this loop of the music, and then I sat and played it, and then grabbed another recorder, and then did a voiceover to it at the same time.
Sure.
And that's how I gave my presentation.
That's how you do all this stuff.
Yep.
And, some of that editorial stuff that I did as a kid, with 1/4-inch tape and just, with the pause button and all that stuff we do, it came in handy for later. I mean, I had a sense of, editorial sense and timing and things like that, and it all played in. And I recorded a ton of sound effects on cassette and on the reel-to-reel recorder that I had. And I used a lot of those when I started my professional career. It's all sort of, worked out. Okay.
Do you remember your first sound gig? Paid sound job?
I worked for a very brief time at a company called Sound Deluxe, and I was their librarian for a little while. And we worked on several films. One of them was The Princess Bride. And I got to record a couple things that made it in that.
No. Don't continue. Let's back it up a little bit. So what sounds did you get to record for Princess Bride? This is inconceivable.
Yeah. I don't even remember completely. I did some stuff in the fire swamp. I also pulled a bunch of effects. When pulling effects is when, you go through the library and you find the sounds that are appropriate for a scene and you make them available to the editors. And I did that a lot for Princess Bride, especially during the fire swamp. I snuck in a few things. One of my favorite films at the time was Buckaroo Banzai. And there were a bunch of editors there who had worked on it, and they had a bunch of effects. And there's one tree frog from Buckaroo Banzai in the scene out there in the forest where they find the Lectroid spaceship. There was a tree frog in the background, and going through all the cut lists, I found, okay, this tree frog was in Buckaroo Banzai. That'll be fairly innocuous. I can stick that into the fire swamp, and it's in there, and I smile when I hear it, but it's like it doesn't mean much to anyone. And just little things like that. And I recorded some cave drips for the Pit of Despair.
So how did you do that? Is this a bathtub trick? Yes, the Pit of Despair.
Yeah, just a bathtub, and it had, bathrooms have wonderful natural reverb.
Yes,
so
they do.
It worked out very nicely. Yeah.
Yeah, you should hear the reverb in mine.
I don't know that we want to go there. So you did Princess Bride, and then what other things did you work on?
Oh, I can't remember.
Because you've worked on, at this point, you've worked on dozens and dozens now. Like what, 50, 60 films?
Well,
probably more than that.
I went to Weddington soon after that, and that's where everything really took off. I mean, I don't even, I consider the Weddington stuff really the beginning of my career, because it really, there weren't very many opportunities at Sound Deluxe. Let me just leave it at that. But at Weddington, they were very supportive and great, and just let me move up, and I was able to, pull all the cut lists off their bookshelves and read and learn all this stuff. I had been fans of their films for a long time already. So I mean, these guys. I mean, Richard Anderson worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark with these guys, and he did. Poltergeist and Beetlejuice and the first Gremlins and all these amazing films, which I was not only a fan of, but I knew some of the guys who had made them, so I sort of watched their creation. But I also listened to them over and over, so I knew the libraries. And when I got to Weddington, I found their library was sort of chronological. It was like big chunks of films. And so I was able to very quickly figure out where different sounds were just based on the films. And I think that they got this impression really quickly that I could find this stuff fairly easily, because as the librarian, which is the entry-level job, one of your first jobs is to take calls from the dub stage. If they're missing an effect, you have to pull it very quickly, transfer it, and send it to the stage. So they would refer to things as they were in the film, not necessarily, a number or whatever. So I was able to figure out where they were really quickly and get them off. And gosh, I must have listened to that whole library a couple times over my tenure there, and it ended up being over 4,000 1/4-inch tapes. It was pretty insane. But
yeah, because nowadays a sound effects librarian is somebody that's working with SoundMiner or an app, where they're just searching for sounds. But back in the day, you just went to a box that had if somebody was properly logging it, you would know in pen it would say a couple of handful of sounds, but then you'd have to turn around and actually pull it off, thread the tape, play it, make sure it's the right sound.
Yeah, well, they did have a computer system with a database and all that, so we could look up stuff. I mean, I'm not, I wasn't just, pulling at air here. They had a database, but it was still pretty primitive. It's nothing like we have today. I'm still old school. I'll still have a book and all that and look stuff up. I'm still getting used to sound miner and metadata and all of that. Just give me a tape, man. Give me a 1/4-inch tape.
Come on, Steve. Get with the times, man.
Right.
Let me
There you
cut
go.
on. Oh my God.
Wow.
That's how I started. I cut, when I started editing, I cut sound on mag film on 2 shows before we made the transition to Pro Tools. 2 shows.
What were those shows?
One of them was Hoffa, which
they shot some of that here in Detroit.
Directed by Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
And I cut backgrounds on a reel. And it was a thrill. And I got to go on the stage and hear my stuff go down, and that was it. But after that, we started cutting all digitally. And Richard Anderson would usually, when an editorial opportunity came up, he would give me reel 1. And it was usually so that he would have more time to pull the rest of the film, because he knew I knew the library so well. He would just give me reel 1 and say, go ahead and pull it and cut it. And it would give him more time to do the rest and hand it out to editors, which it was very trusting of him. But I had a blast. I did reel 1 on a lot of his films. And some of them were really, really busy films, because usually a lot of shit goes down in reel 1.
Yeah.
I remember in Flushed Away, this animated film, the lead character gets flushed down a toilet. He's a rat, and he gets flushed down the toilet. And had to create all this stuff. In Brother Bear, the Disney film, there's like an avalanche in reel 1. Okay, yeah, I can do that.
So what was the avalanche made out of?
Oh, a ton of stuff. I mean, we actually had some like big recordings of rocks falling and things like that. And we had our ace in the hole was this brilliant sound effects designer named John Pospisil. We just called him John P, because it's hard you have to like work at saying Pospisil. But John P, he was brilliant, and he would make stuff from the library. I mean, you'd show him a sequence and say, okay, we need some sounds for this. And he would just sort of nod and go away into his little cave and come back with something that sounds like it was recorded specifically for, that he just set up a mic and recorded an avalanche or whatever. I don't know how he did it. I'd ask him, well, what elements did you use? Oh, I used this and this. And I'd listen to the original elements. And I don't see how he got from here to there. I really don't. He was just brilliant. He was from another planet. He was amazing. But yeah, he made it easy. He would make this wonderful stuff. And not only for that film, but stuff that would cut in for other films years down the line. He made a couple big big castle doors for Beauty and the Beast. And I remember we had another one in a later film, but it was too short. And we still had the 1/4-inch, and we played it at half speed. And not only was the size perfect, but it sunk up. The close was like right on. I mean, this was an effect made for another film, and we're playing it at half speed, and it just dropped in seamlessly. And that happened a lot with John P. He had some kind of foresight that none of us could aspire to have.
Man.
But he was a great guy.
So I guess the most famous sound effect that's out there, as everybody knows, I can already see. Go ahead.
Debatable.
It's debatable.
There are other sound effects that have been used far more than this particular one, but I will go with your.
I haven't even said what it is, and obviously you're acknowledging what it is. Well,
it's going to be on my tombstone.
So
go ahead.
This is a sound effect that has been around before Star Wars, but then obviously the grandfather of sound design, Mr. Ben Burtt, dropped it in. It's been in all of the Star Wars films except for Episode 9. I heard that they left it out as an homage to him.
It's not in a few of the last ones. And Matt Wood concedes it was Ben's thing.
Yeah, it was kind of like his little trademark.
He's pretty much out of the Star Wars franchise film wise now. I mean, he's doing some video games and things like that, but he's not super with those films.
It was used in a handful of films before Star Wars, but obviously since then it's been used in like hundreds, if not thousands of films. But so how does it go from being used in Star Wars to all of a sudden thousands of films? Go ahead. Own up to it now.
Do you want me to start from the beginning? Or
Go ahead. Start from the beginning.
Okay. I've got this ingrained on my brain. In 1951, there was a Western called Distant Drums. And it takes place in the Florida Everglades. And in one scene, there's this procession of soldiers, of cowboys or whatever, going through the Everglades. And they're like waist deep in the swamp. And the guy at the end of the procession gets bitten on the leg and pulled underwater by an alligator. And apparently when they shot it, he opened his mouth, but he didn't let out any sound. It would have had to have been replaced anyway if he did. So in post, they had a session where a bunch of actors came in to do extra little sound bits. And somebody recorded screams for this guy getting bitten and dragged underwater. We think it was Sheb Wooley, who is most famous for his song Purple People Eater. He was in the film also. And
really?
We found some documentation that it was probably him, but we don't know. And he passed away about 10 years ago, so we'll never really know for sure. But which kind of adds to the legend. But anyway, this series of screams, there were 6 screams. They were vaulted away in the Warner Brothers sound effects library. And, anything in the sound library starts getting reused. Like I said, listening as a kid, I would start hearing this scream over and over. It was used a few years later. It was used in tons of films. We're still tracking them down. We're still finding, hearing the scream pop up in these old Westerns. In 1953, there was one called Charge at Feather River. And one of the characters, Private Wilhelm, gets an arrow in his leg and lets out the same scream. And I'm pretty sure that I think that was the first instance where Ben noticed it. Certainly it was the first time a character actually had a name that let out the scream. So he started calling it Wilhelm, the Wilhelm scream. And he sort of adopted it from his recordings off the TV. But it was in a ton of Westerns in the 50s and 60s and episodes of Maverick. The movie Them with the giant ants.
Oh, yeah.
Almost every army guy who gets killed off lets out a Wilhelm scream. There are 6 in the series, so they're different ones. The last 3 are kind of similar and sort of the signature Wilhelm, but all of the screams get used. But anyway, when Ben Burtt was hired to do the sounds for Star Wars, George and Gary Kurtz, the producer, gave him an opportunity to go to the different studios and start collecting elements that he could use for different things like spaceships and things like that. And he remembered this sound from his youth because he did the same thing that I did, listening to movies. And when he was at Warner Brothers, he tracked down the master of the scream. And he started using it in his student films at USC for fun. And even before he had the master, he had a copy, taped off. We found that it was in the clear in the Judy Garland Star is Born. There's a moment where the classic scream is completely in the clear, and you can just
lift it right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was using that, but he found the master at Warner Brothers, and he put it in Star Wars. It's for one of the stormtrooper that pitches off the into the chasm in the Death Star. And he used it in all the Star Wars films. He started using it as sort of a personal sound signature. And Richard Anderson, who went to college, whom I work with, started using it too. It's in Poltergeist and a bunch of the things that Richard did. And when I started at Weddington in the late 80s, all the guys there, Mark Mangini, Steve Flick, they all knew about this from Richard. And they were using it occasionally just for fun. But I just sort of did this full-on, hey, let's get it in everything we work on. And I just turned it into this huge thing. And we tried to sneak it in as many films as we could. And when this little thing called the internet started, I put a list of all the different usages of it's still up. I haven't updated it in years, but it's still up. But I got well past 200 titles of just using this scream. But after that happened, after the internet happened, Pandora's box opened up and everybody knew about this suddenly. And it started popping up all over the place. And I'd get calls from people that say, hey, can I get a copy of that scream to use it in such and such? it just turned into this, as Ben says, it turned into a cult. And I think he was rather upset about it because it was his own little baby. And I sort of turned it into this,
Good going, Steve.
Yeah. But it's in a ton of, I mean, I used it in a bunch of things I worked on. It's in a Goofy movie. It has no business being in a Goofy movie whatsoever. It's
I don't know, because the sound is kind of goofy.
It's in the middle. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's in the middle of a musical number in Goofy. and I remember Kevin Lima, the director, even like, I don't know. But come on. And I sort of goaded him into it. But it's there.
Well, that's another thing that you and I have in common outside of the sound effects world is I am a huge Disney fan. Like, I grew up at Disney World down in Florida. My parents, we always went down on family vacations there. And then you go to Disneyland. You're there like twice a week now. And
not as much anymore. Over the last few years, the annual passes have gotten so expensive. I just went recently to do the Star Wars stuff, which is just fantastic. But no, I don't go as regularly as I did. When I was at Weddington, I went quite often. I mean, they even referred to the library, my office, as Disneyland because I was always playing tracks from the park. When I worked at Imagineering, I was able to get some, wonderful sounds and stuff from that library and just collecting from friends and things like that. And just, I listened to all those sounds. And like I said before, with the whole sound thing with discovering how sounds were reused, there is one particular dog whimper that was originally recorded for Mary Poppins, for the dog in Mary Poppins. It's in Pirates of the Caribbean for the dog holding the key.
Yeah.
And I recognized that right away. And that was another, light bulb moment where, oh my God, there's a Disney sound library. I've got to find that. And so fortunately, when I was with Mark working on Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, we were able to, make selects from the Disney library available to us for the films, because we really tried to, back in the day, there were just a couple different cartoon studios. There was Disney, there was Warner Brothers, there was Hanna-Barbera, MGM had their cartoons too, but they all had their own independent library. There wasn't as much trading going on. There was a little bit, but not much. But you could identify a film just by the sound, the sound effects. Everybody had their own versions of a tube doink, or a prop plane going by for some fast character going by. So you could identify the studio just by the sound effects. And the Disney library was just a brilliant collection of stuff. A guy named Jimmy McDonald is the genius behind most of it. And he had such a distinct style because he would usually build a prop that would make the sound. And so it sort of became a performance thing. Just some great stuff there. So I was thrilled to finally go in there and find all this stuff. And I found my dog whimper. I found the dog bark and whimper, and I was so happy in the Mary Poppins collection. So yeah, no, that's really fun. And a Goofy movie was especially fun. I really treated it like it was one of those old 50s how-to Goofy cartoons. You remember, how to ski, and all those great cartoons. We used a lot of that material.
Gosh.
Yeah. Now, if I remember right, doesn't your voice appear on some of the attractions at Disneyland? Am I right?
I cannot confirm.
You can neither confirm nor deny whether or not you may have slipped. Okay, well, I'll keep it at that. Now, I see on social media all the time, it appears as if you have a reserved booth at the Star Wars Cantina. Are you always sitting in the Han Solo booth?
Officially, no. But yeah.
But unofficially, yes, of course.
Scum and Villainy Cantina on Hollywood Boulevard, owned by my dear friend JC. Yes, I do frequent.
So I guess the real question is this: which side of the booth do you sit on? Are you on the Greedo side, or are you on the Han Solo side?
Oh yeah, good question.
That's a very good question. It's a circular booth, so it's not like.
Does it depend on your mood, or?
It depends. I do a lot of work there. I'll come with my laptop and just sit in the corner. Recently I've tried to be more social, and I'll sit at the bar and talk to my pals, the bartenders and all that. The staff there is just fantastic. And it's one of those, it's like a Cheers vibe where I sit down and my drink is right in front of me suddenly. But yeah, it's funny. My booth was broken for a little while, and they just fixed it. The table was like wobbling.
So now he's calling it my booth. Did you notice that? He slipped that right in there.
Yeah.
It is my booth because that's where I always sit, but it's not officially. I mean, I don't expect to make people move if they're sitting there all.
No, the help will do that for you.
Oh, sure. Well, I am having a birthday party at the end of next month there, and I have reserved a couple booths, including that one.
Well, thanks for the invitation. We'll be there.
Yeah, well, if I knew you were coming, you would certainly be invited.
So what is your drink? Do they have like Star Wars themed drinks?
They do.
Do they have blue milk?
You can get blue milk.
Of course you can.
It's like oh gosh, what is it? It's like a pineapple based drink. It's quite good though. And they have green milk too. They had a promotion on St. Patrick's Day where they sold green milk, which was kind of a minty, kind of a boozy shamrock shake kind of thing. But I say I like it better than the blue milk. And so they kept it on the menu.
Just for Uncle Steve.
Yeah. And there is a drink that's not on the menu that I'm sort of pushing to get on the menu called a Wilhelm Scream. One of the bartenders
Is this like whiskey so that when you shoot it, you have no choice but to give the Wilhelm Scream?
I had a fundraiser. It is whiskey based. Yes, it is bourbon.
Is it like an old fashioned?
It's very much like an old fashioned, actually. It's a variation of
that's going to be Gary's drink then.
My dear friend Squid, she goes by Squid, is a bartender there, formulated the Wilhelm Scream. And we debuted it at an event for the museum. I had a fundraiser for the museum a few months ago, and it did really well. And I'm trying to get it on the menu. It'll at least be available on my birthday, I would hope. But it's a great place, and there's nerdy stuff on the jukebox that plays, and people cosplay and come in all the time.
They have the Star Wars Cantina theme. I'm hopefully on the jukebox. Yes.
No, they have this like playlist that you can select from, and there are like 20 different covers of the Cantina.
Oh, that's great.
Do they have
versions?
Do they have Bill Murray's Star Wars?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That's great. I remember my parents had one of those giant consoles in the 70s and early 80s, and it was like a record player, and it had like an 8-track player and all that kind of stuff. And they had the Star Wars disco mix.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Miko did that.
Yeah.
They have all those. They did a version for all the different films. It's interesting. Since let's steer it back to sound effects for a moment. The original Miko Star Wars had sort of these really cheap imitations of like R2-D2 and things like that they did with the synthesizer. But that album did so well that when they did Empire Strikes Back, they were actually able to license the sound effects. And so when you hear R2-D2 in the Empire version, you hear R2, you hear Chewie, you hear all the original ships go by in the pieces. So that a testament to their success. They did pretty well.
Yeah, that is super cool. So I'm a Hollywood nut. I grew up. I think the defining moment for me with what I wanted to do with my life, I honestly think this is probably where it started. I was probably 9 or 10 years old. I was in my parents' the living room, and on TV we had HBO. And back in the day, HBO meant you had like this little dish or satellite thing on the roof.
The box.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they had the HBO, they had like a theme where you could see the HBO logo. And then they did a different version where they showed the behind the scenes of how they did
when they're going through the city.
Yeah. And they have like this big flyover of this model and all that stuff. And I remember thinking, I want to be those guys. Yeah. That's what I want to do with my life. And so from there on out, I watched everything. For me, movies are one thing, but it's like the behind the scenes. That was really kind of what I was interested in. So my question to you is, go ahead.
You had an advantage because you're slightly younger than I am. When I was
extremely younger.
When I was in that age where I was all curious and learning and wide-eyed, there wasn't that much out there. There were no DVDs, there were no commentaries. There was nothing like that. So I ate up whatever I could find that, documentaries, the Saturday and Sunday Film Festival on local TV with Tom Hatton. He would do little commentaries, and I'd just eat that stuff up and take notes sometimes. I would go, like I said, with my dad to the Academy Library and pull whatever books I could find on the subjects I was interested in, not necessarily just sound. I mean, I was a huge filmmaking buff, so I'd learn all of this. Of course, I was, focusing towards sound, but I wanted to have this awareness of all this stuff, special effects and all that. And of course, I made little films as a kid and all that. But there really wasn't that much until the mid to late 70s. It started the whole revolution. And, I think even Walt Disney, even before the Lucasfilm stuff, Walt was very keen on showing the behind the scenes of the making of stuff. And
right.
there would be a couple moments where you would get to meet Jimmy McDonald and see what he was doing in his little workshop there at the studio. And I just ate that stuff out of the box. I mean, it was great. But now, well, DVDs aren't as big a thing, but all the commentaries and special features and all. Yep. There's a huge wealth of information, and I really think that perpetuated this whole movement now that geeks and nerds are suddenly cool again, and popular, because the filmmaking thing sort of became an art in everyone's eyes, because you could see the effort that went into it. It wasn't just this passive thing that you would view for 2 hours and go home. It was like, oh my God, they made a movie with all this amazing stuff. I think that really helped the ball rolling for all of us film geeks all over the world.
Oh yeah, my world morphed. Because I grew up. I'm a huge fan of Disney World. We were always going there on vacations, and we were watching Disney.
Sure.
On Sunday nights. That was Disney night. On ABC.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We watched the movies.
You make popcorn and you watch Wonderful World of Disney.
Oh, you're immersed in magic. Yeah.
Wild Kingdom before that too.
Oh yeah, the Wild Kingdom.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Mutual Omaha.
Yeah, and then the 80s rolled around, and then halfway through the 80s, they opened up MGM Studios, and now it was now movies became a theme park, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now you can go ride the movies, and then they had a Foley presentation you could go and watch, and they would show Jimmy McDonald and show how they made the sound effects, and so growing up, my mind was like, man, how do we make movies? I want to make movies. I want to make movies, and then finally, after I got out of film school, I ended up recording sound effects as a hobby, and then from there just started selling libraries. But it all came from the passion of, dude, I just want to be a part of the industry. I just want to meet some of these people, and because these guys are wizards. I mean, I've been in the business now for over 20 years, but when I met Ben Burt, I was at Skywalker, and he was in the cafeteria, and I was nervous. I didn't want to go up to him, and I was there with Gary Rizzo, who's also a Full Sail grad and multi-Academy Award winner. Now he's won a couple. And
I know Gary.
Gary's like, do you want to meet him? I'm like, is it okay? Here I'm in my early 40s.
I'm like, the same way. Richard Anderson introduced me to Ben at the Academy, and I was the same way. I was really?
Yeah, these guys are giants.
I've been corresponding with him, but I hadn't been. It was so funny.
Yeah, that same day we met Ben inside, because their cafeteria, oh my gosh, they have amazing food there, by the way. And we went outside on the patio area to sit, and I was totally crushing. My sound design crush is Gary Rydstrom. Oh my God, he's hands down one of my favorite sound designers, and he was sitting a couple tables away, and I was too nervous to approach him because I didn't want to. I didn't meet him because I didn't want to bug the guy in the middle of his lunch. But it's my one regret. I wish I would have went over and introduced myself. But
I got to tell you, Gary Rydstrom is one of the nicest guys on the planet, and we're actually. We'll get more into this later, but we're actually starting a fundraiser for the museum, and Gary went above and beyond, and he shot a quick video for us endorsing it and all that. He's the best. He really is the sweetest guy, and I'm really loving that new documentary that my friend Midge Costin did called "Making Waves." Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Gary's all over that. There are three guys that they concentrate: Walter Murch, Ben Burt, and Gary.
Rightfully so. Yeah.
Yeah, you get to hear their whole story and how they got into it, and a lot of the themes that we've discussed here. It's like all of us have this sort of, the circle that we've, came from and started learning about this stuff. And, Gary was no different. Gary kind of stumbled into it because he got noticed, and they hired him at Skywalker. And most of his first gigs came because Ben wasn't available. They wanted Ben Burt, but let's give this new guy a chance. And that's how Gary got noticed. And, after Jurassic Park, it's like,
fortune
this guy,
and fame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but he's just a genuinely nice guy.
Well, we heard Rick's sound crushes. Who's your sound crush?
Oh gosh. Well, I wouldn't call him that.
We'll call him that.
Yeah, I call him crushes. Yeah, I have no problem.
Well, obviously Ben Burt, because he was the first guy that I really started corresponding with, and was very sweet to me, and gave me a lot of great opportunities. and told me about Richard. And I found Richard and all those guys at Weddington, Old Weddington, Richard Anderson, Mark Mangini, Steve Flick. Not only were they heroes of mine, but they became very good friends, and working with them on all these different shows was such a thrill. And, all the times they were nominated for an Oscar, Steve Flick won an Oscar for Speed, the movie Speed with Keanu Reeves. That while I was there, I worked on it with him. And so that was the first time where we all, shared one of these. Well, obviously Steven won it, but, he brought it in, and it's like we all helped him win that. And just, your heroes turn into your friends, which is one of the most gratifying things about something like this in any creative endeavor, where you're able to work with these guys that you've admired and help contribute to the craft. It's been great.
Well, I was not only a fan, still am a fan of Ben Burt, the Ben Burt sound, but I was especially a fan of the Ben Burt mustache. Is there any way we can get him to bring that back?
Yeah, we need to bring back the Ben Burt mustache.
I was just talking to him about that because we were printing some pictures for the museum, and there was one of him on an aircraft character where he has the stash. I don't know how long he had that. I think he had that in the early 80s.
Yeah,
for a few
years.
I think everybody had one of those in the early 80s.
He needs to bring it back.
Yeah.
I'll let him know.
Just put it in a word, please.
Just put in a word for us. Look, Rick and Gary really want you to bring that mustache back. But.
We've exchanged single word emails sometimes. It's like I remember when I saw the second prequel, I guess Attack of the Clones. There's a sequence at the beginning of it where a big ship crashes, and I heard an alarm klaxon in the background during all this cacophony of everything going off. And there was this alarm klaxon that went on. And I stopped the DVD and listened again. And I suddenly realized it's an old Warner Brothers sound effect. Do you know that there's this Warner Brothers alarm that's sort of this goofy, it just goes off. It's like, whoop, 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 whoop. It's this classic Warner Brothers comic effect. Before you get to that piece that is used in all the cartoons, it's just a straight alarm klaxon that just goes whoop whoop like that. It's in Attack of the Clones.
There you
That's
go.
Part of it, and I heard it right away. And the original has so much optical hiss on and all that, but it's during this scene with all this stuff going on that you can get away with it. And I emailed him. I shot him an email real quick because we're email buddies and we talk about sound effects all the time. And I even knew the catalog number. I knew the YE number of the sound effect. So I sent him an email with the number in the subject line, and I said, "In Attack of the Clones, Reel 1?" ? And I got back a one word email back from him. Guilty.
Now, you'd mentioned Mark Mangini. I had the privilege. I've met with Mark a couple of times, but we shot an episode.
I love Mark.
He's a great guy. With it was for Rode Microphones. We did a video series called Road Rage, which was essentially the whole purpose and the vision behind it was I wanted to meet all my heroes. And so I called up Rode. I said, "Listen, I want to go out and meet all these guys. Why don't we shoot interviews with them?" They said, "Go for it." So we went out. We talked to Scott Gershon. We talked to Alan Howarth, and Mark Mangini was one of them. And I was totally blown away. One of the best stories. He worked on Gremlins as well. By the way.
Mark did all the Gremlin voices. He supervised all that for both films.
Did he do the voice of Gizmo?
No, that was Howie Mandel.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, because Shanette, my fiance, she's got this really cute Chihuahua, and his name is Gizmo.
Aww.
Because straight on, he looks just like Gizmo.
Well, Chris Wallace and his wonderful team that made all the Gremlins for the first film, Gizmo was originally monochromatic. He had just one color to him. But somebody had the idea that because they were kind of worried about their jobs in the film and getting made and all that, somebody decided to make a prototype of Gizmo with the color and pattern of Spielberg's dog at the time. Because apparently it had that same pattern, and they made a prototype of Gizmo with that same color and the same pattern. And he just lit up when he saw it. Oh my God, this is great. Yeah, let's do this. So that probably has something to do with the film getting made.
One of my favorite Mark Mangini stories was it was Star Trek IV. What was it called? The Voyage Home,
yeah.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's this scene on a school bus with these punk rockers, and then you can hear this song playing through this boombox. And I remember as a kid, the song was like, I hate you, and I say screw you. And I, as a kid, I thought that was an actual song, and I looked for it. I could never find the song, and so finally,
well, it is now.
Is it?
It's on one of the new versions of this. I mean, I've had it because Mark co-wrote that song.
Yeah, they recorded it in the hallway, I think, at the studio or
something. Which became my office. It was like they did some remodeling in that corner of Weddington where it was just this open like equipment staging area. And they needed more office space, so they put in a couple walls and a couple doors, and my office was actually where they recorded I Hate You, right in that corner there. Because they wanted it to have this little garage band kind of cheap sound, one mic. But yeah, it was Mark Mancini on guitar, Kirk Thatcher did the vocals, who was the associate producer of Star Trek 4. He was Nimoy's assistant, and he actually plays the punk rock guy on the bus.
With the mohawk?
Yeah.
Nice.
And it was Aaron Glasscock on drums, one of the sound assistants there. And they just recorded it really quick and wrote it, just really fast, and it's in the film. But yeah, it's a horrible, wonderful song.
Yeah, I remember as a kid hoping that they would I would find it somewhere. But so this actual full-length version of it somewhere?
Yeah, I actually talked to Kirk. There's a video on YouTube if you search "I Hate You."
Oh, I'm going to look for it. Yeah,
Kirk Thatcher. Yeah, I sat down with Kirk. Yeah, he's wearing bunny ears, I think, and I'm wearing like a captain's hat, and Kermit the Frog is sitting between us. It's very funny. But we talked at length about. He told me the whole story of "I Hate You" and how it got made. Yeah,
that's a great story. So we're going to cut here, and we'll come back for another episode. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Hollywood Sound Museum. And,
yes, please.
So stay tuned for part 2.